Okay, welcome back to the 100-day art challenge, and once again I am using toilet roll that I have cut straight and flattened out into a nice rectangle. So this is what I'm going to be making my portrait on today. It's a side profile, and I start off as always straight in there with ink, and just like with a previous video, I am starting by measuring the negative space around the character that I'm drawing. I find this to be a really useful way of placing your model on the surface, because you're concentrating on the proportions of them as well as looking at the background and how they sit on the surface face, and that's what I think makes it more proportional on the picture plane. So for this character, as I said, it's going to be pretty much a side profile. It's not exactly side on, but it's as close as I get for a lot of this challenge. I think most of my portraits have been 3/4, and a couple of them have been more straight on. Now, the one thing which makes this tricky is that line that you can see going diagonally across the cardboard there. That is actually a ridge, and it makes it difficult to draw on, but all I'm doing is the proportional marks at the moment, just trying to make sure everything sits where I think it looks comfortable and accurate enough to try and explain what I'm looking at as far as this character. And on this occasion, this chap is going to be rendered in a slightly different way than I normally do. Only slightly different, but in a way which I think is adding to this challenge as opposed to just repeating myself over and over again, because I know that I do a lot of portraits in this challenge, and I also do a lot of ink first and then oil pastels. I love using oil pastels. I think they're really nice as far as the finish that they give you. They're very painterly looking and the colours are really vibrant, and using ink first is more comfortable for me than using pencil. And I'm doing very wispy, scratchy lines. I've explained this in another video, but I normally don't draw like this. I normally draw with bigger swooping marks, but for some reason when I'm doing this challenge, it just makes me go a lot more hesitant and making sure that I'm careful with the marks that I'm making. So it's little chicken scratches along the way, but it's still not the worst drawing, I don't think, even though I'd like to improve on that type of mark when it comes to the preliminary sketch before going in with a bit of colour. But yeah, the way that I'm going to approach this differently is that I normally do this big blending technique that I talk about quite a lot, and I really like the way that that looks on the surface. So I'm not changing my technique because I'm dissatisfied with the results previously. I'm changing the technique because I think that there are stages of these portraits that are quite nice and pleasing to the eye, but they're not what I'm aiming for with that particular drawing or painting. So on this occasion, my decision was to try and stop sooner and strategically make marks a bit more clean and designed, so that I didn't have to cover them up with more blending like I usually do. What I mean is, if you've seen these before, I often put down either a dark brown or a deep red or something which is tonally quite dark, and then I start to blend into that with a lighter but not the lightest pink, or lighter or mid yellow or something like that, because that blends into the darker colour. And then I'll use something lighter again, and then you've got this texture that's building up on the surface. On this occasion, I'm not going to do that. I've talked before in different videos about shape design. I think that's one of the more important aspects of art making, is an appreciation for shape design. I've also tried to engage interviewees with this subject to differing levels of success, because some people think that I'm talking about literally triangles and circles, or I don't know how they're interpreting the question, but all I mean is that instead of everything being blended and smoothed out or brushed in or just made to disappear in some way, to actually make rigid marks. So if I'm doing things in black and white, it has this binary effect, and you'll see here with this brown that I'm applying, I'm not being especially careful yet, but when it comes to how much I'm going to leave behind, I try to make sure it's leaving a shape of some sort. Instead of it being just loose and scratchy, it has to have a certain edge to it, because if I'm not going to blend into this brown with another colour, then it needs to sit in a quite pleasant way and a designed shape of its own. That's all I mean by shape design. You see that mark that I just made down the cheek there, that shadow mark which goes down the edge? Maybe I would have made that anyway, but on this occasion it's a very deliberate choice to leave that in as it is. The shadow is going to describe the tonality of the light and the texture on the face beyond what I normally do. Well, not beyond, sorry, when I normally go beyond this stage, sorry, so it's the opposite. So it's going to try and describe things in a more limited way than I normally do, which goes beyond this shadow description that I'm using. This is the way that I usually describe light when I'm drawing with ink, is that I will make sure that the shadow shapes are descriptive and are designed in a way which sit quite comfortably and don't need to be feathered or need hatching to transition them out into the light. They'll instead just sit in a very strong shape on the surface. And that's what I'm trying to do here, is to make sure that I observe keenly what the reference is showing, but also making decisions along the way at how I can interpret that onto the surface, because I'm looking at a photograph, and what I'm trying to do there by rotating that oil pastel in my hand is to try and find an edge. They're very blunt instruments, so when you do need to make a thinner mark, it can be quite tricky because they are very rounded. The photograph is from the Instagram account Earth's World, and I will put their account on the screen now so that you can see them. They are aware that I'm using their portraits. I've linked them in my Instagram account to show that I'm posting portraits of their work. I very much appreciate their photography. They're a great account for inspiration, and if you ever want to use their inspiration the way that I do, then just give them credit. It's the only decent thing to do, and the way to use people's source material for your benefit. I'm going in here with a darker brown because if I'm going to do shadow on the hair, I don't want that brown necessarily to blend in with the brown of the face. It can do, I suppose, but that would flatten it even more than I'm doing already. And the layers that I'm applying currently to this portrait are flat layers. That's why I enjoy oil pastels in my other portraits, is that they're no longer flat. They're giving this painterly approach where they build up in texture and tone, and they're really quite thick and creamy looking colours that are being applied. Whereas on this occasion I'm going to try and make it fairly graphic. This is going to be really minimal in the way that it's sitting on the surface, but I think already you can see quite a bit of character from that shadow shape on the face, or the different shadow shapes, and then with this hair description that I've started here. And I think just these different curled marks, just to show the way that the hair is curving round the head, and to show how the hair is wisping round each other and being influenced by different bulks of hair, because usually when you want to draw or paint hair, I recommend trying to describe the volume as opposed to drawing or painting individual follicles. Instead, what you want to do is to show this is a bulk of hair here at the back or at the side or whatever you're trying to do, and that will look like a more interesting and accurate description of someone's hair than if you start to do individual follicles, which you really can't focus on in real life. It makes it just a different type of artwork. It's more heightened when you do that. Little touches of the darker brown on the eyebrows and underneath the moustache, I think, are quite effective, and that's why I like this two-toned approach that I'm doing so far, is that just this mid-tone and dark are doing a lot of the heavy lifting for the portrait description. And this is where I make this big decision of what I need to do for his shirt as well. do I use these two colours, or do I try to offset them with something cooler? And there you go, you can see here a nice cool blue, green blue that I'm using there. And because the browns are warm earth tones, they're sitting on the surface, which is another brown, and it's all very warm. So to offset that with cool colours is going to make it pop, it's going to complement it, and it will just make it a lot more bright and appealing of an image when they're sat together. They complement each other. You would think that the focus would be on the clothing because that is the brightest part, but we're instinctively attracted to and drawn to looking at people's faces. So I find it quite a nice balance between the brightness of the clothing and the limited description that I've used for the facial features. And yet I still feel as though you can see age and you can see a certain style of the person's kind of personality that I'm trying to depict on the surface, just with those very small mid-brown and dark brown marks. And here I've just got a darker greeny blue to describe the shadow on the clothing here. In fact, it's just a dark blue, it's not even a greeny blue, but because the blue I put down already, the light blue, was quite a green type of blue, the blue again will just sit on top in a nice kind of shadow effect, which I'm trying to now pick my way through. And a lot of the time it's where to avoid putting down marks. It's not where do I put down the mark, it's where don't I put the mark. As soon as you put a dark mark in a place where it doesn't belong, you either need to cover it with light, or you need to make a decision about the background, because if I went onto the background with that dark colour, I would have made a mistake and had to try and cover it up. But if you are aware of where you don't make marks, that's one of the more important decisions that you can make. And if you're trying to describe creases and the description of clothing, it can be very limited. Where do the shadows collect? And you'll be seeing a lot of information on a photograph. So to really reduce that, one of the tips that I've found the most helpful in my drawing and painting is to squint your eyes, or to look through your eyelashes. The reason why you do that is because all of those details will disappear when you squint, and instead all you see is mid-tone, light and dark. You don't see creases, you don't see really subtle details here and there, you won't see tonality or any labels. You'll just see that's where there's shadow, that's where there isn't shadow, that's where the light is, and that's where it's not as light and it's not as dark. So it's just light, shadow and mid-tone, and that's what's really helpful for images like this, is to reduce all those details down to the core information that you need to describe a human being. And that's why I'm trying to describe this shirt in this way. You can see the direction in which the creases go, you can see the direction that the light is coming from, and this is all using 4 different colours: a light green, mid to dark blue, a mid brown and a dark brown. But it's also aided by the fact that the surface that I'm drawing or painting on isn't white. Using this toilet roll, the cardboard, it's not white, it's a light brown. That's really nice, especially if I were going to use a lighter colour to do the highlights. Having this mid colour means that the light and the brown can interact with each other in a more powerful way. But even when you don't, it's a lot more of a restful surface to look at than if you had this bright white surface shining back at you. It's not as appealing, and I think it's more stressful on the eyes to have something which is so high in contrast that you're trying to interpret the marks from, and instead to have something which is a lot more gentle to look at. It's just nicer and I think more suitable for this type of reduced portrait. I'm just doing some more subtle marks here, using the dark brown to suggest under the nose and the eyelids there connecting with the eyebrows, and then the side of the mouth, and then underneath the chin. These are key areas where shadow collects, and I could have left those out, but I think little extra touches don't hurt, and they help portraits like this. often when I do portraits, the light will be shining on the face, and what I find quite nice about this portrait is that it's shining from behind. Now I'm just brushing off the little flakes and crumbs that accumulate when you're doing oil pastels, and there it is. And I think it's quite a pleasant portrait, and I thank Earth's World for the amazing source material. I really do enjoy using it. Check them out for yourself. If you're going to use oil pastels, try out different techniques, because as you can see, there are lots of different ways of making art. And as always, even when I've laid it down, I've brushed off all the crumbs and I feel like it's finished, there's always a slight extra mark to make. But that was it, just the back of his head, and he's finished. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.